Ladies and gentlemen, good morning from Regina, Saskatchewan, here at the First Nations University of Canada, where First Nations Power Authority got its start back in 2010, 2011, in a conversation we had with the then Minister and Government of Saskatchewan and Sask Power Corporation. And so, for those of you who are not familiar with the FNPA, First Nations Power Authority is a nonprofit entity operating in 3 different provinces, both Alberta, in Saskatchewan, and now in Ontario, with offices in Calgary, Saskatoon, Regina, and East York, Ontario. It's my great pleasure to present to all of you today in terms of sort of the cross-country overview of what some of the challenges are with First Nations energy systems, and how we certainly rely significantly on microgrids in many rural, remote, and Indigenous communities in Canada. And so I want to thank the previous speakers for raising the awareness and issues around First Nations issues as it relates to microgrids and the reliance on propane and diesel generation. Remote communities around the world rely on various non-renewable and renewable sources of modern electricity to supply their basic needs. Renewable energy are those available in perpetual supply from the natural world. The most common renewable resource employed for energy generation is biomass. Example, wood in temperate climates is used for fuel, for heating and cooking. Other renewable resources suitable for energy generation include solar, wind, biofuels, geothermal, and hydropower. Classically, the degree to which the renewable resources are considered and investigated as alternatives to fuel, fossil fuel, is a function of technological advances, both on cost and reliability, and unpredictable fossil fuel prices. A microgrid, for example, is an autonomous energy system. Microgrids provide heat and power dependent or independent of connection of a utility scale grid in Canada. In Canada, there are over 250 remote communities utilizing microgrids to heat and power schools, homes, and social infrastructure. Remote communities share some distinct physical and social characteristics: low population densities, limited conventional energy sources, and lack of infrastructure. Low levels of economic activity, physical access constraints, and long distance to external electricity markets. Cold climate microgrids are also those operating in Arctic and subarctic regions. They provide electricity to remote communities with high proportions of Indigenous populations, using diesel fuel generators for power. Absent of imported or exported power, cold climate microgrids are designed so that all electricity generation and consumption is balanced within them through the maintenance of grid frequency and voltage. Many of Canada's electric utility corporations act as natural monopolies, defined by fixed costs, technological constraints, declining average cost over demanded output, and high barriers to entry, both from a legal and a regulatory perspective, resulting in economies of scale. The immense capital outlay required to design and install electricity generation and distribution infrastructure makes it one of the costliest industries to establish and manage. The lack of competition in natural monopolistic markets that electricity supply is subject to inelastic demand, whereby an increase in electricity prices to consumers results in almost exclusively an increase in revenue for the utility. And this results in inefficiencies on demand and supply sides. Just for your knowledge, the first cold climate microgrids were installed in Canada's remote communities roughly 50 years ago. Issues with cold climate microgrids include their high costs, their inefficiencies with imported fuel that have unreliable delivery schedules, inefficient energy use, and difficulty repairing outages. These high costs can lead to trade-offs between northern, remote, and Indigenous residents choosing to heat their home and purchasing other essential goods, including nutritious foods. The cost to consumers, utilities, and governments, coupled with the desire for northern Indigenous remote communities. The Government of Canada outlined that these much more needs to be done in terms of advancements in renewable energy production and investment. Remote communities around the world rely on the various non-renewable and renewable sources of modern electricity to supply basic needs. Renewable resources are those available in perpetual supply from the natural world. Those are some of the key items that I think ultimately we see in terms of energy insecurity. The FNPA, through many of its partnerships in development and general members across the country, really do suffer an ever-increasing, I would say, existential threat to their own sustainability. And so, what are we doing, or what are our key priorities in the very near future moving forward? We're looking at identifying key hubs or areas of regional interest to advance both collaboration with provincial utilities, the federal government in terms of federal investments, and key technologies that make sense to implement so that these costs can be offset, both from a microgrid and rural and remote opportunity, but also those that are grid connected and rely on fossil fuels. Here at home in Saskatchewan, for example, we are faced with, again, retiring coal plants and have a significant technological challenge in terms of what is to replace coal. And of course, we're examining small modular reactor technology, other types of alternative energy systems that might help to provide some cost relief and some affordability for many ratepayers in Saskatchewan. So additional wind and solar opportunities will be rolled out by SaskPower in the next little while here, where the government of Saskatchewan announced a 700 megawatts of new wind and solar come on stream in Saskatchewan. Other areas I think that are of interest would be additional new natural gas generation. That's something that SaskPower right now is considering. Other Indigenous communities have taken a leadership role in terms of Indigenous equity participation. For example, in the province of Quebec, where we've seen 8 First Nations acquire and take an equity ownership position in natural gas plants in that province. Additionally, as also the co-chair of the Indigenous Advisory Council on Small Modular Reactor Action Plan and Technology, it's my great pleasure to say that there are some recent announcements and advancements in equity participation of small modular reactor technology. We'll be looking at partnering with the Ontario Power Generation around the de-risking of SMRs and how Indigenous communities can participate in equity participation. And I'll just conclude by saying that we continue to advance meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities. We create that safe, ethical space for these conversations to happen. And that always hasn't been the case, I think, for the conversations around electricity generation and other aspects of the energy conversation around the country. And so I'm very proud on behalf of our small but mighty organization here out of Regina to advance these conversations. And yeah, looking forward to my participation on the Energy Council of Canada Board of Directors, and I'll field any questions you might have at this time.
Well, not seeing any hands pop up. I did actually want to mention that this year, Energy Council of Canada put out Volume 2 of Indigenous Energy Across Canada. This is our compendium of stories of Indigenous partnerships in energy. There's more and more of these stories. They are cross-sectoral. There are so many of these stories that we did our second volume just a couple years after putting out our first. And Guy was actually kind enough to help lend a foreword to that document. So if you haven't already, I do encourage all of you to go to our website and check out Indigenous Energy Across Canada. It speaks to the type of progress the Guy is talking about, but that the Guy is also leading. And maybe a general question for you, Guy. You know, as we seek to embark on a road of reconciliation, and we see progress in the energy sector, How central a role do you feel energy is to that sort of grander objective of reaching reconciliation across the country?
Yeah, I think that there's, first of all, I'll lean on many of the colleagues that are probably on this call in terms of agreeing that there's really no path to net zero without meaningful Indigenous participation, not only in the conversation, but the ownership of energy infrastructure. And it has long been, not unknown that First Nations have not been at the table driving the bus, if you will, but been passengers on this bus in terms of the energy conversation. And so ultimately, economic reconciliation is being realized by First Nations and Indigenous communities buying back portions of land and buying back and owning energy assets, as we see the Waytay Power Project in Ontario. Many great examples of energy infrastructure being purchased and taken up. So I think that's a significant opportunity for Canada to lead the way in terms of exporting that knowledge and ensuring that regulatory and legal parameters or constraints aren't dominating the conversation in Canada moving forward. And FNPA's keen interest is to advance these conversations so that they create win-win partnerships, obviously. And I think we've seen many legal challenges after legal challenges go in favor of First Nations communities, and we just have to have utilities in Canada. We talk with New Brunswick Power, SAS Power, the Ontario Power Generation. They're all making advances to implement aspects of free, prior, and informed consent, aspects of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I would say stay tuned. There's lots of evolving conversations where we will finally recognize the value of traditional knowledge systems from Indigenous elders and community members. Yeah, I think I'm quite optimistic about the future. As long as First Nations people are involved and their communities have a say in the energy conversation, I think we've advanced our common goals.
And Guy, do you get a chance much to connect with peers and colleagues from around the world, other First Nations, Indigenous people from other countries, and how they're involved in their energy sectors? How do you sense we're doing compared to other places?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to talk to the president of Navco Power out of the Navajo Nation. They're again advancing large-scale, utility-scale renewable energy generation to ensure that the Navajo Nation and those who are still burning wood for their heat and don't have electricity, 30% of the electricity in that tribal nation, one of the world's largest tribal nations in Canada, at least in North America, still suffers from energy insecurity and energy poverty. And so we want to see that there's a bit of a movement towards the democratization of energy choices and more local generation. And so we're advancing studies with the University of Saskatchewan right now. We'll look at exploring the Alaska Native Electricity Cooperative this May, making a trip up there and really trying to learn about what it takes to be able to finance and ensure that there's the cost benefit analysis to implementing these benefits, not just the community itself, but those who would, from the private sector, who would choose to invest in opportunities like this along with the federal government. And so that continues to be an ongoing conversation globally. I'm hopeful one day that we can have actually a Team Canada approach that says it's not just the wind and solar, but it's really advanced technologies like small modular reactor technologies that help to provide the pathway forward to a net zero future.
Well, thanks so much, Guy, for a very comprehensive update and also a really optimistic approach and message. It encourages me that we're starting to head down the right path. So thank you.